Hi everyone, I just wanted to give a quick intro and context to these videos. So I have a friend locally here who I play Digimon and Magic and some other stuff with who has expressed interest in WIXOSS. And obviously the game is 2 years old at this point, recently hit the anniversary or about to hit it, something like that. And we were playing and he sort of asked me offhand, like, is there a list of staples or anything like that out there? And I kind of thought and I was like, there's kind of not. So I made a bunch of them, one for each color and one for multicolor and colorless. And we basically went through it and recorded. It was sort of like a live stream thing. So it ended up being a lot longer than I thought. So I'm going to split these up into one for each color and then one for colorless slash multicolored. And I will also post the lists for all of them below if you wanted to check them out and see. There are some cards that I did not put in here and I forgot as we were going through, and I caught some of them and I have updated some of the lists. But so yeah, if you are new to the game, trying to figure out what the good stuff is, what people are playing at the 2 year anniversary point, um, this should hopefully get you started. This is sort of like a primer for people who are coming in knowing nothing, just to get a quick idea of what's out there. So enjoy. Okay, so let's go into blue. Blue is a very powerful, like, secondary color. The center Elrics in blue aren't so great, but it has a lot of really useful tools that basically any deck wants. Madoka 3. This is the second one. There's two different level 3 Madokas. She's probably one of the better, if not the best, blue center right now. At the beginning of your attack phase, each player draws and discards a card. When she enters, you can basically force your opponent to discard 2 cards, or you can freeze their Elrig, which is very powerful. It can shut down like Tama or a bunch of other stuff. If they're aggro decks, the fact that they lose an Elrig damage that they were counting on is potentially a big deal. And then once per game, if you have 3 or more cards than your opponent, you get to bottom deck one of their Signy for free. So it's removal, it's enter denial, all that good stuff. The auto effect potentially triggers. There's some blue cards that care about discarding cards, so it's potentially useful as well. So yeah, it's sort of like generic blue stuff, I guess. Aya is whenever she attacks, you reveal the top card of your opponent's deck, and then depending on the level, she does stuff. You either draw a card or your opponent discards a card. She also has a once per game to basically turn a Signy face down, and then at the beginning of each attack phase, your opponent can pay 2 enter or discard 2 cards to turn it face up. So it's sort of a weird roundabout way to just remove a Signy from the game, because they're probably never going to pay this ever, because it's expensive to just bring that back. So yeah, it's the fact that it kind of stays on the field is kind of awkward, because then they don't get it in enter, they don't get it back in the trash if they refresh or whatever. So yeah, like, these two are really the only blues centers to talk about right now. The rest of these are all really useful assists. This Umar draw, this is sort of the quote-unquote standard blue. Level 1 is just to draw 2 cards. Again, it's not always draw 2. Like the Madoka float is discard 1 to draw 3, which is arguably a lot better, because you can get something you don't need and get an extra card out of it. Some of them, I think you can, like, look at the top X cards of your deck. Lunar Blossom is draw a card, your opponent discards a card. That's right. But yeah, basically draw 2 is sort of like the standard for blue level 1s. Ray Empty Blade is draw 2, your opponent discards 2. A lot of times what you'll see is the Empty Blade Lunar Blossom. It basically, you can, if you're level 2, you can kind of do them both on the same turn. So you're drawing 3 and you're making your opponent discard 3 cards. So they basically will have an empty hand and you have a full hand to do whatever you need to. The downside with Empty Blade is, again, this is a level 2 assist that doesn't really protect you in any way. It's sort of like proactive protection, which isn't the best, and there's some ways to get around that. Madoka Float we talked about. This is one of the most powerful level 1 assists in the game, just because of the card advantage and selection that it gets you. And Madoka herself is one of the best level 2s also, because she has a 3-stop level 2 assist for, similar to Mel, pay 2, down target Signy, discard 2, down another, pay 3 enter, down a third. So this is an effect that we see across multiple colors. And this is one of the better ways to do it, because if, like, especially if your opponent's on Tama, because Tama cares about having up Signy and you're downing them now, so it's because some of them like keep them standing, so the fact that this downs them is more relevant. Umar Clear is sort of like a mini Wheel of Fortune type effect, where you discard your hand and draw equal to the number of cards you discarded plus 1. Your opponent does the same, except it's the number they discarded minus 1. So on its own, it's a plus 2 in like pure card advantage. Additionally, if your opponent has like 4 or 5 cards in hand, it's also kind of like a mill 4 or 5, because they're discarding that and just drawing that many, so you're getting that closer to a refresh. She also has pay 1 to freeze target Elrig. Again, similar to the Madoka, you can really kind of keep them shut down. You'll see, I guess we're almost there. There's some gross ways you can just basically freeze out your opponent's Elrig for like a bunch of turns in blue, and then just kind of keep them down. This Miko Miko, I put this on the list because it is one of 3 level 1 assist Elrigs that have attack phase timing. Basically, all of the level 1s are main phase, except for this one, and there's 2 white level 1s that have attack phase timing. So that's basically the only notable thing about this. The other notable thing is it's sort of like a Xeno cluster where you draw 3, discard 2, but if you discarded a card by your opponent's effect this turn, instead you draw 5 and discard 2. So it kind of, again, like the same way that Xeno cluster fills you back up, this also does that. So that's basically the reason why it has attack phase timing, because otherwise it would be basically unusable. So it's, again, if they're playing Miko Miko, this is something to keep an eye out for. The other assist line is the Pure Look line. Snipe is look at your opponent's hand and discard a card of your choice. So choose specific discard is like, if you can choose it, it's very powerful. The fact that it doesn't hit a guard is a little awkward, but you can potentially hit, whatever play that they were probably expecting to make next turn. Peeping Analyze is the same way, except you get to just choose any card, which is probably going to be a guard. Again, just because having guards is so valuable, and if you can discard a guard from their hand with no restrictions, you would do it. It also freeze a target Elrig on your opponent's field. So if you want to be a real jerk, you can have Pure Look Umar Clear with Madoka and freeze your opponent's Elrig 3 different times if you want. So it does, again, the fact that none of these have attack phase timing. I guess this one has attack phase timing, but it doesn't really protect from Signy. It's a funny way to just like proactively keep your opponent locked down.
That does sound kind of fun.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Yeah. For one player, that's really fun. For the other player, it's probably not very fun. Song of WIXOSS, it costs nothing. You can use it main phase or attack phase. You do have to have a blue Elrig, which is why it has some blue identity. You draw 3 at the beginning of your next end phase, discard 2. So this is sort of like an infusion of cards that you can use temporarily. There are. I mean,
if you're out of cards and you really need them, draw 3, play them all, nothing to discard.
Exactly. Yeah, that is another viable way to use that. I've referenced it before. There's a Dash Harana deck that does a lot of damage that uses this to basically fill their hand, because they're going to empty it anyway. Like you said, it doesn't matter. So it's sort of a way to get free card advantage. Summer Life Blues, it requires 2 or more blue Elrigs, but for the cost of 2 blue, you get to draw 2 and then bottom deck a Signy on your opponent's field. So if they are doing some blue centric shenanigans, this is a pretty good piece for it. Actually, all of these are really powerful pieces, so it's kind of whatever you want to choose here. Peeping Future is basically whenever your Elrig attacks, you get to look at your opponent's hand and discard it, and then your opponent cannot up their Elrig unless they pay 3. So it's kind of like a freeze. It's also kind of like the Peeping Analyze Assist. Really, the hardest part about this card is that there's just so many other blue pieces that are really powerful, and it has to compete with them.
Yeah.
Specifically Ultra Superheroes, which we'll talk about in a second. Can't Stop Pretty it basically gives your center Elrig an ability that during the attack phase, you can exceed 4 to down a target Signy on your opponent's field unless they discard 3 cards. So it's a way instead of using like an assist Elrig, you can actually use a piece potentially to be defensive, and there's not a whole lot of ways to do that outside of like mocking a Guardian Dragon that will trigger on your opponent's attack phase. So it's a pretty good way to do that, although it's a little bit awkward at times, and it really only works in like more dedicated discard strategies, because if they can just discard
you
3
can only
cards
do it twice too.
You can only do it once because it's exceed 4. And again, the maximum
Oh, he only
exceed.
has 7
Yeah,
on
the
day
maximum.
8.
Nope. Okay, Ultra Superheroes is sort of the de facto best Dream Team piece in the game, partially just because of the colors, because it is a blue piece, so it requires blue. And then it has, if you have a white L rig, you get to look at the top 5 and put 2 to your hand. If you have a black L rig, you get to mill your opponent 10, which again, 10 is a pretty good number. You'd like it to be like closer to 15, but 10 plus a little bit of ancillary mill will get you there. And then if you have a red one, you can also open a lane. But you typically see this with the Esper, the blue, white, black. So those are the typical modes that are used on this. This is a subset of pieces that actually care about the colors of Elrigs you're using that all came out in the same set. And then if the color restriction is lifted in English Diva format, all of these pieces are going to become powerful, because if you have Mardu, if you have white, red, blue, or if you have white, red, black, you just get all of these effects, even if you're not running blue.
Yeah.
So definitely some stuff to watch out for. Even without that, this is already a really powerful piece, because it only costs 1 enter, draws you 2, mills your opponent 10. So yeah, it's very useful. Okay, so now we have non-life burst Signy. Hecate is basically look at top 3. It's essentially a scry 3 in Magic terms. You look at the top 3, any number on top and any number on bottom, in the orders of your choosing. So it's card selection. It's a really good way to keep yourself, knowing what you're going to draw and sort of keep whatever you need on top, that type of thing. Firefly Squid requires a white Elrig on. Well, I shouldn't say it requires. Harmony is you have to down a required Elrig. So this requires, if you have a white Elrig, you have to down it when this enters the field. Otherwise, this Signy will enter down, so it cannot attack on the turn you play it. Which isn't, for this one specifically, it's not the end of the world, because her auto effects are really powerful. At the beginning of your attack phase, you just get to draw a card for free. And then once per turn, when you discard a card by your own effect, your opponent discards at random. So that's like,
pretty good.
Yeah, her with like the Madoka, who's like, you're always going to be doing this, at the beginning of your attack phase, each player draws and discards. So the Madoka will trigger, then you have the trigger the Firefly Squid, so now your opponent has to discard an extra card. So yeah, there's a lot of other ways in blue that do that too. Like this one, for example, Thrilling costs 1 blue, draw 2 and discard 1. If you pay the exceed 4, instead you just draw 3. So it's an efficient draw spell. Again, if you care about discarding, like with Firefly Squid, it can trigger that as well. And there's some other blue cards that do that as well that we'll see in a minute. Columbus has Harmony 2 Elrig, which is potentially a big deal. The big one is at the beginning of your attack phase, if this is upped, you can discard 3 cards to vanish target Signy. There's not a whole lot of ways in blue that just vanish Signy, and Columbus is one of the few. There's some ways that you can bottom deck it, but a lot of that's like in the Elrig deck. There's not a lot of like blue Signy that have removal printed on them, and Columbus is one of the few, which is why she has Harmony, because you can basically, you could have 2 of these on the field at the same time if you wanted to discard 6, I guess, but you're typically not doing that. Bruno is one of the more common level 2s that you'll see. As long as this is in the center zone, whenever it attacks, you either get to draw a card or make your opponent discard a card. It is their choice, so it's not like the best discard, but if you're kind of adding up multiples of these or doing multiple discard effects with like a Firefly Squid or whatever, it's really good hand control. If your opponent doesn't have any cards in hand already, she's a +1 anyway, so there's some flexibility involved with that. There's another one, I did not put it in here. There's another one that came out, or no, that's a different card I'm thinking of, never mind. So yeah, this is just a good kind of generic level 2. Level 2s are kind of awkward because they're like somewhat powerful, but not quite as powerful as the level 3s. But this is a good blue one to put in to basically any deck. Sui is basically rummaging. Discard up to 2 cards to draw a card for each card discarded this way. So if you have a lousy hand, you can dunk it, try again. Again, it also triggers like Firefly Squid whenever you discard cards, or like the next card, Pure Look. Whenever you discard a card during your main phase, you get to put, once per turn, you get to put that card from your trash onto your field. So potentially with Sui, it's actually not even, because by this itself, this isn't plus. This is -2 +2. If you have Pure Look, it's actually +1 because she gets that card back.
Yeah.
And then additionally, she triggers herself. So whenever a Signy enters your field from a zone other than the hand, which if this triggers, it will enter from the trash. You get to freeze a Signy and give it -2. So it's freezing. It's potentially removal. The coin effect is fine, I guess. It's better in dedicated discard strategies, but it's the kind of thing where if you're not using your coins for anything else, it's all right, I guess. It's just a little awkward. Odahime, when this attacks, draw 2. So that's pretty good. It's just an auto ability. So if she survives, you're drawing 2, which is pretty good. Enter effect, if there's 5 or less cards in your hand, you put it into the trash unless you pay 1. So there is sort of the downside to that you basically have to pay and enter, and then when she attacks, you'll draw 2. Additionally, she has the action to discard 4 cards, and then basically bottom deck one of your opponent's Signy with power 10k or less. So again, not a lot of blue Signy have removal stapled to them. This is another one that does. This is one of the newer cards that's coming out soon as well, so I'm curious to see if this shows up in blue decks. Random Drain is one of the more generically useful spells in the game. Cost of blue, draw a card, your opponent discards a card. If you are on Team Uchu, the discard is at random as opposed to being chosen, which is obviously very powerful. On its own, it's basically pay and enter, draw a card. It's sort of like a free cycle, and then your opponent discards a card, which, again, to keep their hand down and keep them in check, that sort of like fits into everything blue is doing. Even if they choose the worst card in their hand, there's enough sort of like ancillary discard that happens in blue that this can typically keep them down pretty low. Focalore is one of the best life bursts that's in blue. This is a completely vanilla card. It has no text other than Life Burst, which is down up to 2 targets in your opponent's field and draw a card. So similar to like the Akufuku. I actually did not, now that I thought about it, I didn't put Akufuku in here. I should have done that. I missed that one. Rip. That's fine. So yeah, so basically if you hit this on, like if your opponent hits this on their first attack, then basically all of their Signies are just useless for the rest of the turn. So it's a really powerful effect. Additionally, 10k, pretty big body. Level 2s are sometimes awkward to find. Actually, between Focalore and Bruno are the only level 2s that are in the list. So if you're looking for level 2s, you certainly could do worse. Notre Dame is whenever your opponent draws a card, they discard a card during the main phase and attack phase. So this actually also combos with Madoka because you're forcing them to draw during the attack phase. So Madoka will trigger, they'll draw a card, discard a card, and now because they drew a card during the attack phase, Notre Dame triggers and they have to discard another card. So again, keeping their hand low. She also has a really good effect. Whenever she's vanished, you can discard 2 cards and bring her back to the field down. So she's really sticky and awkward to remove, even if you need to remove her. So typically in blue, you're going to have the cards to pay for this. So yeah, she's a really good, if you're already leaning into the hand control stuff, she's a really good finisher for that type of thing. H2O has Rise on top of an Atom Signy. The reason why, I mean, well, let's just finish H2O. So during the opponent's turn, if she has 1 or more cards underneath it, which she would because she would have Rised, if it would ever leave the field, instead you can put all cards underneath it and underneath the Signy into their owner's trash. So basically, if she has risen on top of an Atom and still has that Atom, whenever you remove her, she does not get removed the first time. So she already has like... Yeah, you have to remove her twice in order to remove her. Additionally, whenever she attacks, you get to draw a card or your opponent discards. So she's got the Bruno effect just in any lane. This is basically the enabler for the Atomic deck. So there's a lot of Atom Signy that care about having Atomic Signy to pitch in their hand to discard to either remove Signy or draw cards or stuff like that. This is the only Atom Signy that I'm talking about because she's basically like the king... I guess queen of the Atomic archetype, and basically all Atomic decks will try to get into H2O, and there's a bunch of specific things that are like not necessarily like generic staples, so to speak. So it's not worth talking about them in sort of like a generic deck, but it's worth knowing that Atomic is arguably the strongest tribe that's in the game right now. In terms of if you wanted to build a tribal deck, Atoms is probably the best way to do it, and it's almost entirely because H2O is just a very powerful top-end card with that. Futase is, during your opponent's turn, as long as you have more cards than your opponent, she has Shadow level 2 or less Signy. So she's, even though she's only 3k, she's potentially pretty sticky to remove if they have like Lancelots or Focalores or whatever. They'll need to use like their assist Elrics probably to remove it. Her Life Burst is fine, I guess. It's a little awkward, but Hyacinth is a little bit unusual. Enter effect, you can discard a card at the end of your turn, enter charge 1. It is one of the few ways outside of green to enter charge, and in blue, blue has a lot of ways, obviously, as you've seen, to just add a bunch of stuff to their hand, so they typically have pretty big hands. You can basically turn those hands into other resources with Hyacinth if you need to. Probably not super relevant, but it's just something to keep in mind. Umar Memoria is similar to Hecate, with the difference being she only looks at the top card of the deck, and you can choose to put it on the bottom. But she also has an action that you can put this Signy on the bottom from the field, and then reveal the top card of the deck. If it is any other Signy other than Umar, you can put it on the field. So you already probably will know what it is, just because of the enter effect. And if you're like, oh, that Signy is better than Umar, you can just swap out Umar for something else. Unless it's like a servant, you probably wouldn't do that. But yeah, it's interesting, like, board control option. It's kind of like a way to draw a card on a level 1 Signy, basically. And then Madoka Memoria, whenever you discard from your opponent's hand by your card effect, you can discard a card to either draw 1 or enter charge 1. So again, going back to Center Madoka, you're discarding a card from her auto effect once per turn. So if you have this on here, you can either draw a card or enter charge 1 on top of that, which is, it sort of synergizes with a lot of stuff, and random drain too. So normally random drain is basically pay and enter, and you're sort of net neutral on cards because you're using this as a spell and then drawing a card. But if you have Madoka, you random drain now becomes like completely neutral because you're drawing a card, Madoka gives you the enter back that you just used on it. So now, you can kind of keep all that stuff going, and keep, just a way to generate resources with doing stuff that you're already probably doing anyway. It is twice per turn, so you can't like keep chaining it. But yeah, it's just a nice way to sort of keep everything going.